this clip I want to cover one of the other aspects of the core, and it's one of its key functions. And that's got to do with pelvic tilt. Now, people may have heard of pelvic tilting before, and it really has become somewhat problematic in today's world of social media. So what do I mean when I talk about pelvic tilting? So with pelvic tilting, there are kind of three positions your pelvis can be in. There can be a neutral or a normal tilt position. And so it's not so much a tilt, it's just the correct position that your pelvis should be placed in, as you can see by this image. Then you can have what's called an anterior pelvic tilt, and that's when the top of the pelvis tilts forward, and I also call it the Instagram butt position, where if you anteriorly rotate your pelvis, you can make your bum look quite a bit bigger than what it actually really is. And then you have a posterior pelvic tilt, where you have tilted the upper part of your pelvis backwards, and that then creates a different problem, less of an issue than the anterior tilt, which I'll talk about in a second, but still problematic nonetheless. So let's talk a little bit about the anterior pelvic tilt. That's the typical one that we see people have. So why does that happen? That happens for a number of reasons. Now, as we've already talked, we know that your core is attached to your pelvis. So if your rectus abdominis and your front abdominal muscles aren't strong, then what will happen is your pelvis will then be tempted to tilt forward because it's not being held in place. In conjunction with that, if you don't have strong gluteal muscles or backside muscles or strong hamstrings, they then are also involved in maintaining a neutral pelvis. That will further increase the anterior tilt of your pelvis. The last aspect, which is really important, and this is related to anyone who spends much of their day sitting down, is that your hip flexors also attach to the top part of your pelvis. So if your hip flexors are tight, they will then also assist in that anterior rotation of your pelvis. And the problem with sitting down all day is that your hip flexors get shorter and shorter because a seated position causes your hip flexors to be in a short contracted state, and then when you stand up, they don't automatically go back to their full length, and that can then create this anterior pelvic position. Now, it's bad for a number of reasons, but the major one is that it puts the lower lumbar vertebrae or lower spine in quite an exaggerated position, and this over time can cause quite a bit of discomfort and pain. So one good measure of a functional core is that it holds the pelvis in a neutral position when you're standing or doing any sort of activity. And if it's not, then there are some things we can strengthen or lengthen to try and make sure that we get you back into a good pelvic tilt, because that's also then important for good quality posture.